Hello and welcome to part 2 of my long range hunting series. Today we're going to be talking about calibers and cartridges, and this is going to be fun. I really love this topic. We've got a lot of material to cover and evidence. Evidence because I can feel the heat building around this one already. This was the second video in the series and people were like, let me at him. If he disses my favourite cartridge, I'm going to tell him what it's worth. That's fine, you go for it. So this is going to be quite a fun one. What we're going to do straight away, I'm going to smash through a whole lot of definitions so that we can get all the definitions done and dusted, get the knowledge that we need around those definitions, and actually move on into the evidence or the research or the science, you could call it, and start piecing together the actual reason why we want to choose a particular cartridge to do our long range hunting. And why I like going this way around it is because it's not just get handed a rifle and go and shoot stuff at long range and it seems to work. We actually want to know what we're doing and why we're doing it. Let's define our title firstly. Let's define what a caliber is. So a caliber is a term for the diameter of the particular bore size, that is the barrel bore size that we are shooting. So generally there's a little bit of change between the millimeters and inches, so you get 0.264 is a caliber, 0.277 of an inch is a caliber, 0.284 of an inch is a caliber. So they're all calibers. There's many different calibers, but basically it's the diameter of that particular bore size. When we talk about cartridges, we're talking about chamberings in that particular caliber. So if we have 30 caliber, we have a chambering of a 308, or chambering or a cartridge of a 3006, 300 Winchester Magnum. Those are your cartridges, also known as chamberings. So those two terms we need to understand and define, and why certain calibers, so the diameter, we're just going to cross off. And I will show you through evidence and thinking and research why I think we can cross those off and why other calibers suit much better. There's our calibers understanding, and then we've got cartridges understanding. Now the next two definitions we really do need to understand when we're talking about calibers is we need to understand sectional density, and we also need to understand ballistic coefficiency. Those are two terms that are important to understand when we're looking at calibers and also bullet weights inside those calibers. Simply put, sectional density is a unit of measurement that is taken from the particular projectile's ability in that caliber to penetrate into the animal and through the animal. But not only that, sectional density is a little bit more complex than that. It's also the bullet's ability to how it travels through. Ballistic coefficiency is a unit of measurement given to a particular projectile to calculate that projectile's ability to resist drag and wind as it travels to the animal. So you could see it like this. You've got your BC, your ballistic coefficiency, is what happens in flight, and your SD is the sectional density of what happens, so when it gets to the animal, SD, when it's traveling to the animal, BC. They're two really crucial numbers that we need to look at. Now, long range hunting, I'm going to make an assumption that we are talking about you taking a particular cartridge, long range hunting with it in a large game class category. Now when we say large game, we're talking anything that weighs from 40 kilos right up to 300 kilos. So we're talking your small deer, goats, piglets, pigs, hogs. We're talking mule deer, whitetail deer, red deer, all the way through to elk, all that sort of thing. That's basically 90% of the hunting that is done worldwide. Now, What I'm going to say here could be controversial, and so everyone's getting ready. But I want to spend a bit of time on this question and answer, you could say. How does a particular projectile actually kill an animal? And some might say, well, that's just really obvious. It just knocks it over. But I don't actually believe that is the case at all. I believe the single way. Are you ready for this? Are you ready? We'll see how this goes. The one way a projectile actually expires an animal is through blood loss. That's it. It's not energy. It's just not. It's not through diameter size or caliber size. And you say, yeah, but my 338 just knocks stuff over. Okay, all right. So let's acknowledge that certain calibers or diameters, they seem to create more trauma. And I agree with that. Trauma is the animal is sent into some confusion, and I believe that is hydrostatic shock. And so that is basically a term for when the bullet is going fast enough to create an effect that sends a hydrostatic, so basically it travels through the liquid of the animal. It sends a shock wave through the animal which can very quickly reach the nervous system, and you get that drop effect. Now, most drops, even done out 1,000 yards, whatever, are spinal shock. Most are. And I'm going to say, from the long range hunting that I've done, when an animal drops, I actually feel slightly uncomfortable because I know I'm reloading again because that thing could get up any minute. Because I don't know how much damage has been done to that spine, and I don't actually want the bullet in the spine. I know it looks great on video, but even in close range quarters, when you've still got that hydraulic shock or hydrostatic shock, you can get your animal to drop. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't believe, a lot of people think you need to go bigger in your caliber and all that sort of thing, and it's not true. It's not true. That is not how a particular projectile kills. It's not how a cartridge kills. It's not how a caliber kills. What kills your animal is blood loss when we're talking longer range, because basically any caliber cartridge inside 300-ish yards, you lose the ability to kill with blood loss plus trauma inside there. You do not have the velocity anymore past most calibers past 300 or 400 yards, 350 yards. You don't have the velocity to create that shock. It is just like shooting an animal with a broadhead. Doesn't matter if it's a mechanical broadhead, whatever. Your bow and arrow does not have the energy to create trauma. You are solely relying on blood loss. So, with that said, tell me what you think of that. I know some people think, man, my gun just drops them all, blah, blah, blah. Great. That is great. But when you go past 300, some of them are even 200 yards. When you go past that, you are relying on one way to kill your animal, and that is through blood loss. That is it. Large game, traditionally it needs a sectional density of 0.27 to 0.330. There you go, to 0.30. That's your traditional understanding of large game, the sectional density that you need to make an ethical kill on that animal. Now, there's another one that people have traditionally put in there, which I actually disagree with. Traditionally, you need 1,000 foot-pounds of energy. I don't think energy's got anything to do with you harvesting game at long range. Now, you'll see some of these ones have been crossed off, and you're already thinking, what? How dare you? Well, just hear me out. As we get to the science of it. I've crossed out the 24 caliber, the 6mm, because we're really looking for this. We're really looking for a sectional density, which basically means the ability to penetrate that particular game that you're trying to harvest well. And the 24 caliber with a 108 grain bullet, it just doesn't come to that. For small game, medium small game, yeah, it really does. Fine, it's fine. But for large game, it just doesn't cut it. And I've got these in green to say these are the ones that I'm going to discard. And I'm not saying that if you're a very experienced hunter and shooter, you can't do it. You might do it at 400 yards or 500 yards, but I think the key here is to do it consistently every time well. And there's also other factors when we start getting into ballistic coefficients and things like that come into this. I've discarded the 24 caliber. I've discarded the 25 caliber. Simply because that bullet, the heavy bullets are just too stout. They're too short. Ballistic coefficient's just too low. And so you actually end up with a lower sectional density than the 6mm or the 24 calibers, which is quite interesting. So the 25 caliber really is starting to wane off. The 2506 cartridge, that really put the 25 caliber on the pedestal, but it's all just starting to wane off now, and for good reason. I've put in here the 277, and I think this is going to be the controversial one, because the 6.8 Western is now out. There's the 27 Nosler, those chamberings, and they are there. Okay, they're right there. But the traditional 270 Winchester with a 1 in 10 twist is just not going to cut it. And I will explain this as we get into the chamberings as well. I might just touch on this one. This one's really controversial. I don't know why. Because the 270 Winchester, the 270 Wisdom, just for going really long, there's just so much. There's much better options than that. Now, you can grill me for that, but I'll show you why. So the 145 grain ELDX is just making it. It's just on that limit of having enough just sectional density to be in our list. And so I've discarded that. But I have put in here a 277, and I put a 170 grain Berger, I believe it's called an Outer Limits or Elite. And that's great. That has a huge sectional density. And so I put that in there to say, like, for now, the 277s are kind of hazy. But I do believe they are coming, and they're going to be good. I actually think the 277s are going to eventually overtake the 6.5mm, simply because those bullet weights are going to get right up there with the 277. So we'll see what happens there, and I hope that manufacturers, I hope Hornady get a hold of it, okay? And I hope that manufacturers really go for it and start chambering good rifles with the right twist rates and get into it. So I've got the 6.5s in here as probably your bare minimum where you need to be just on sectional density. The reason why the 6.5s are there and good and better than these is because of their ballistic coefficient. So the 140 grains generally go 2.87. That sits about right. So we're in and we're happy. If you are starting to hit larger game, we're talking big 200, 300 kilo game, the 147, the 150, the 153, they're up at 301. They're great. They have the ability to really drive straight through the animal and penetrate well. And I've experienced this as well. 7mm, the 162 grains. So the 7mm is the hot one at the moment, and rightly so. I believe the 7mm or the 284 caliber is the king at the moment. And I would say for various reasons why it's king, and we can talk about that because of the kind of rifles it's chambered in and just recoil and all those sorts of things that touch one another. It really is sitting at the king at the moment. The 162, it is a little bit stout, and so the sectional density is actually the same as a 6.5 140 grain. Once you start to get into the 180s, 190s, your sectional density comes right up to 0.319. So you're really getting good straight travel through your animals and extremely deep penetration with the 7mm. Then we jump up to the 30 calibers. They're still rocking it. People are moving away a little from the 30 calibers because they're a little recoil sensitive. But the 178 grain, actually, doesn't, the 30 caliber is quite wide. There's quite a wide diameter. So even the 178, we're starting to see we're just kind of, for long range, when we're balancing BC and sectional density, we're actually down at 2.68. So we're kind of getting down a little bit. But if you come up to the 200 grains, 208 grains, we're up at 313, which is really high. And then if you come up to my favorites, the 225s, the 220 grains and the 30 cals, you're up at 339. So you're really going to be driving that long bullet straight, and it's going to be able to penetrate and go the distance. Now this one might be a little surprising, and I'll put the 338s down here, because everyone thinks like, oh, if you want to go extreme long range, you need to go into 338s. And when I mean extreme long range, I mean if you kind of wanted to go past that 1200 yard mark, then you need a 338. Well, yeah, I guess so. I think the 30 cals do everything the 338s do anyway. But the 338s, if you really look at a 230 grain bullet in a 338, it has a sectional density of 288. That's quite a stout bullet. Unless you get up into the 270 grain, 250, 270, you're up at 338. So you really, then you popped up there. BCs are pretty good, but in order to drive that thing, a 338 caliber with a good amount of penetration for large game, in order to drive that thing at any decent velocity, the recoil is just vicious. And I've had a 338. I've had a 338, and I just hated it. It was too much. I preferred my 300 rum, hot loaded with a 225 grain, much more, which had a lot less wind deflection and all those sorts of things, over my 338. As soon as you go 33806, 338 Federal, just forget it. They're just, for long range hunting, forget it. We're talking, there's much better calibers and cartridges out there to do that. So I've actually discarded the 338 because I believe there's only 1 out of 10 people that can actually shoot a 338 well. So there you go. That might be controversial, but there's my reasons just on sectional density, and I haven't even touched on ballistic coefficiency really. So next part of our video is going to be on cartridges, and I'm not sure if you're hoping that I'll basically answer your question, which cartridge or chambering should I be using? Because I can't really just do that in a blanket statement. Now, before we get into cartridges, I'd be really interested if you guys drop a comment with the cartridge you use, why you use it, and what you use it for. Like, I use it for mule deer at 500 yards, or I use it to shoot tar at 800 yards, or I backpack hunt. So basically my kind of hunting is I'm carrying all my kit in a bag on my back, and I'll travel 25 to 30 kilometers in a 24-hour period. So I'm on the move, all my gear's lightweight, so I'm using like a short action, non-magnum 284 Winchester rifle is my that's where I kind of go. And it's, for me, that's what I, so we're sort of talking 7mm. That's what I kind of do. But then I've got a 300 Winchester Magnum, and I'll use that if I know I'm not really going way up to the top, if I'm not going as far, if it's summer, I'll take that. It's a heavier rifle, quite a bit heavier. It's like a whole kg heavier than my 284 Winchester. So I can't really tell you, because from this chart that I just showed you, there's so many variables when it comes to picking a particular cartridge or a chambering in a particular rifle for a particular need. So I can't really just say to you, like, you should just go out and buy this, because everyone's application is going to be slightly different. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you in this part of the video what I believe are the crucial things that we're looking for in a particular cartridge. Now, energy doesn't matter. I don't really care. I don't care how much energy a particular cartridge has at 1,000 yards. I really don't care. I care about how much velocity it's carrying, but I'll bring you over to the board here, and I'm going to show you why energy doesn't matter. Now, but this has been pushed in marketing. Yeah, this is going to hold like a lot of energy, blah, 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 but that's actually got nothing to do with it. And I'll tell you why. Before we go to the board, I'll tell you why. If you put a 338 Lapua Magnum in my hands and I shoot the correct projectile for long-range hunting and I shoot a deer in the back legs with it, that deer is still going to suffer, and it's going to take longer, a lot longer, for it to expire if I take a 6.5 Creedmoor and I put the right bullet right where it needs to go. The two main things, and energy is not part of it, caliber size is not part of it. The two main things that you need to consider for when you want to bring down game quickly in long range hunting is, I believe, the number one important thing, the most important thing, is that your projectile has the ability to combat the atmospheric conditions, the wind. That I really believe that. And the second one is that your projectile has the ability to do what it needs to do at low velocities. And we'll talk on that when we get into projectile choice, because I'm quite opinionated about that as well. So I don't think energy matters. It just doesn't matter. I'll show you why. Right. So the reason why is because you might notice in blue on Vivid, there's 54 foot-pounds up there. That is what my bow, my compound bow, carries in energy if you are standing half a meter away from the end of my arrow. That is 75 pounds with a 450 grain arrow. Now at 30 yards, my bow is carrying only 44 foot-pounds of energy. So if we have this unwritten, unscientific rule in the rifle community that you need 1,000 foot-pounds of energy to take down a deer or an elk or whatever ethically, well, it just doesn't really hold water. And the reason why is the bow shoots a very, very long projectile. And that projectile relies on what I believe, I call it a projectile, but it's an arrow. And that is the same principle as a bullet going out at long range. There is no hydrostatic or hydraulic shock with a bow. You are simply relying on the one method, which is blood loss. But we all know the compound bows work very, very well if your arrow is put in the correct place on the animal. Which brings me to the chart that I've got on the left, the paper chart. For me, I really believe that wind drift is the most important element to a particular cartridge or chambering. And the second would be that you're using a projectile that is going to give you the best terminal ballistics that it possibly can. And we're going to cover that in another video under projectile choice. Let's take the two kings on the page. Let's take the 28 Nosler and the 300 Rum. The 28 Nosler with a 180 grain bullet traveling at 3.1 to 3.150 feet per second, or the 300 Rum with a 225 traveling at 2.950, the recoil is quite punishing. They start to get really, really difficult to manage that recoil. And once you develop a flinch because of that recoil, where you mentally become more or less afraid of that rifle, or you might need to add a whole lot of weight to the rifle just to keep that fore end down from jumping around, you really ask yourself, well, what's the point? Why don't we just subtract a few hundred yards of what I can shoot out to and shoot a lighter, smaller caliber better? So if someone came to me and said, I want a cartridge that I can get started with long range hunting, there's probably three in here that I would point them to. I would point them firstly to the 6.5 PRC. The 7mm Rem mag is basically identical to it. or the 300 Win Mag if they think they can handle a little more recoil. I hope this makes a little clear why the 308 Winchester, the 3006, the 270 Wisdom down the bottom, and the 338 Winchester Magnum, why I would steer people away from those kind of cartridges, because I believe that the wind drift and the terminal ballistics of those projectiles is the most important. Alright guys, there's my video on calibers and cartridges. If it wasn't helpful, just say it. If you're really stuck and you think, dude, this did not help me at all. In fact, it made me more confused. Well, that sucks. That was not the point. But I hope you found that helpful. And like I said, always feel free to banter. I really enjoy it. There's always something I could learn. So drop a comment down below. And if you have a strong opinion, just sock it. Just do it. I'll be interested to hear it.